And we have a lot of speakers from a wide range of careers, from academia, industry, Forest Service. So hopefully you find something that interests you, or this helps you narrow down your career choices and how to actually achieve those. So this is the agenda for today. So we're just going to have a quick introduction, and we have prepared questions that we have. And this will end with a Q&A session where the audience can ask the panelists questions. You can use the chat, raise your hand and unmute. But if you're too shy, you can just message either tweeting Karen or I, and then we can relay your question to the panelists. So introductions.
Okay, so now, yes, we're going to be doing introductions for the panelists, and there's a specific order, so we'll call on each of you. Our first panelist is Sam. Welcome, Sam.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for having me here. I didn't prepare a little speech or anything, but I'll try to give you a quick overview of kind of what I've done and what I'm looking to do. It's not been a long career, as you can probably tell. I'm a PhD student now at UC Berkeley in the Environmental Science Policy and Management Department. I'm in my third year now, but before I came to Berkeley, I did a couple of different things abroad and here in the United States, most of it involving wildlife. So I started out actually studying international relations at the University of Texas, ended up switching into geography and the environment after spending a summer doing fieldwork in Botswana, and had always loved animals, had always kind of resisted the pull to actually make them my career. I don't think I really knew where that would take me. And so I decided I did want to work with wildlife. I worked at the Houston Zoo. And then after I graduated, I worked at a condor, an Andean condor rehab center in Buenos Aires for a bit. I did program translation. I took care of the birds. And then I got a job at Disney's Animal Kingdom, where I was an animal behavior scientist. I worked with gorillas, tigers, some of the Siamang, some of their bird species as well. After that, did my master's degree at the Yale School of Forestry. And then I started moving into the economics field. And I was interested in wildlife, but I wanted to do something a little more interdisciplinary, and I wanted to see if I could build kind of a unique tool set for tackling questions of wildlife conservation. Outside of zoos, I decided zoos are not the place for me. I was more interested in doing it in the habitat that animals lived in the wild. Got my degree at Yale, and then I spent 2 years working for EcoHealth Alliance, which is a nonprofit that focuses on environmental health. I was on the conservation and health team. I worked in Liberia and at West Africa, and in Southeast Asia, mostly on forest conservation, with a focus on zoonotic diseases that are transmitted from animals in the wild to humans. And then I ended up here at Berkeley. When I'm not doing my degree, which is on wildlife migrations, I am a bike guide with Backroads in the Pacific Northwest. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. And our next panelist is going to be, next slide, Dr. Nicole Molinari.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for having me. Well, so at this point in my life, I work for the Forest Service, and I function as an ecologist for the Southern California ecoregion. And so I live in Santa Barbara, and I'm stationed on the Los Padres National Forest. And maybe I'll back up just a little bit before I get into what I do today and tell you about, how I got to this point. As an undergraduate, I studied zoology. I was very interested in wildlife, interested in veterinary medicine. And then I did a study abroad, which I would encourage all of you to do. Any experience that comes up where you can sort of get out of your little comfort zone, I think is good. And during that study abroad, I realized that I was drawn to kind of plant-animal interactions, so pollinator services. And I was pretty far into my undergraduate degree at that point. So I stuck with zoology, saw it through, and then went on to get a master's degree where I studied for my thesis the interaction between plants and animals. So really looked at the sort of that intersection of herbivory and native and invasive species to see if there was, some controls over native herbivores on native plants here in California. From there, so it's kind of these stepping stones for me. I started thinking all about animals, moved on to plant-animal interactions, and then for my PhD, I focused strictly on sort of plant community ecology. And my main focus there was looking at plant invasions and their effect on biodiversity, especially in grasslands. After that, I dabbled a little bit. I had a postdoc at Berkeley for a while, postdoc at UC Santa Barbara, and then joined a federal agency. And so the Forest Service is a really interesting federal agency to work for. Its mandate is multiple use, meaning that these lands were set aside for people to harvest and extract natural resources. So you can imagine, as an ecologist, it's really interesting and also very, very challenging to try to balance natural resource extraction. So things like grazing use or oil and gas exploration or timber harvest with trying to conserve natural resources. So my role here in Southern California with the Forest Service is to try to bring the best available science to bear on some of these, what I consider very, very challenging decisions about how we use our federal lands. And so in that capacity, I do a lot of literature synthesis. So I synthesize other people's science and use that to help the Forest Service make good decisions about what they're doing out on our landscapes. But I also have some capacity to do my own science. So if there's no science to synthesize because it hasn't been done, then I get to go out and through experimentation or working with grad students largely at UCSB or some of the local universities, we design experiments to help the Forest Service be informed as they make some really challenging decisions about how to manage our wildlands.
Thank you, Nicole. Our next panelist is going to be Anna Cassady. Welcome, Anna.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name's Anna Cassady. I also didn't really prepare too much. My history is a little bit short. So I did my bachelor's at UC San Diego. I majored in environmental science. And then when I was there, I did 2 internships. My first one was Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and that was like, lab work, kind of more like traditional research. And then I had another internship at an environmental consulting company called Dudek that was based in San Diego. And both of them were like really great and like taught me pretty different things. But when I finished school, I kind of felt like I didn't really want to do lab work. So I was really done with being in school. So going on to do any sort of like master's or PhD was like out of the question. So I continued my internship with Dudek, and then that turned into a full-time job several months after I graduated. And then maybe, I guess about 4 years after I was working at Dudek, I decided I did want to go back to school and get my master's, which I did at UC Riverside. It was really fun. Like I got to kind of like rediscover research and like what I liked and didn't like about it. I studied wastewater treatment plant effluent and how it interacts with wildlife species in the California area. And I mostly went back to school because because my work was willing to pay for some of it, so it was a really good opportunity. And I just wanted to get a little bit more of a foundation in biology. So my undergrad is in environmental science. I don't know if any of you were environmental science majors, but at UC San Diego, it's like multidisciplinary, which is cool, but it's also tough because you don't really learn that much about anything. You kind of get like a really broad overview of a lot of topics. And then my career, I was doing, ecology work essentially, but I didn't have any like formal training in the subject. So that was like a big component of why I wanted to go back to school. So I did that. I went to school part-time while also working part-time. And then I've continued to work since I finished my master's last year. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with environmental consulting, so we support projects that generally have environmental impacts. So like if someone is building something, it could be like a private developer, but it could also be like a city who's building a bridge, or a public agency that needs to do some sort of maintenance work. They will bring in consultants to, maybe help them design their projects, but also to evaluate the environmental resources on the site and help them navigate the various environmental laws and regulations, and write the necessary reports, do the necessary surveys, help them get the necessary permits. So that's what I do. So my work is I do a lot of field work, but I also do a lot of like data analysis and write reports, coordinate with different agencies and clients in order to sort of find like compromises for projects. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you. Our next panelist is going to be Dr. Ann Hilborn.
Hi, everybody. So glad to be here. So I, just going to run through what sort of my history, because there is no linear path from what I wanted to do to what I'm doing now. So I, like Nicole, actually was one of the last sort of people when they stopped offering zoology degrees. So I got my BS at the University of Washington in zoology, and I had no idea what I wanted to do besides I liked animals and I liked being outside and I liked doing field work. And so these sort of panels used to really stress me out. I was like, I don't know what I want to do. This is so stressful. But through connections, I got a research assistant job in Tanzania working for the Serengeti Cheetah Project. And so my job was one of the most amazing jobs in the world, which was just to drive around a national park and look for cheetahs and then record their behavior. And I did that for 3 years. And then I got kind of burnt out. Like I loved field work, but it was sort of spending 11 months a year in the field was a little bit much by the end. So then I came back to the States and I worked for the Alaska Salmon Program, which is based out of the University of Washington. And that was a better mixture in a sense, because we did 3 months of field work in the summer up sort of monitoring sockeye salmon populations in Alaska, and then 9 months of data entry and lab work down in Seattle. And that taught me that data entry is pretty boring and I'm not good at lab work. And so after like 2 years of that, I was looking for something else, and the Great Recession was happening and like funding was being cut for universities all over the place. And so I thought, well, let's try grad school, which I had no interest in right after university at all. So I applied to a bunch of things and I got an NSF GRFP for 3 years of funding. And I still had connections in England from my cheetah work. And if I was like, oh, I could take 3 years of funding and use 1 year of it to do a master's in England, or spend 3 years of it in the US doing a master's. So I thought, okay, let's do the 1 year plan. And then I have money left over in case I want to do a PhD, which I wasn't sure about. So I went to, I did my master's in England, which was an intensive like 1 year master's, it involved using data from cheetahs that I had collected and the project had collected. I'm glad I did it, but there's definitely some downsides in doing a master's that quickly. And then I sort of hemmed and hawed and I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I was like, I got these 2 years of funding left. It'd be foolish to not use it. So I started a PhD at Virginia Tech in wildlife conservation, and I focused again on using cheetah data, and I got to go back to Serengeti and do another about 9 months of field work for my PhD, which is basically why I wanted to do a PhD, was to do field work again. And I learned during my PhD that like research is not what I'm great at. And I started to do a lot of teaching, which I enjoyed a lot more, and a lot of science communication. And then after my PhD, I had no idea, because I knew research wasn't my strong point, and like all the research jobs are really competitive, faculty jobs are really competitive. So I applied to a whole bunch of different things and ended up getting a postdoc at UCR to do create online classes, which I'd never done before. Had nothing to do with ecology research anymore. But it really had me sort of coalescing a whole bunch of information about ecology and evolution and conservation and global change biology, and really using sort of the literature synthesis skills to sort of distill information into something manageable for undergrads that makes sense, that's frameworked, that works with all the learning goals. So that was really interesting. And then, so I did that for 3 years. I was actually in the lab with Anna. And then we ran out of money on the postdoc and I had to go look for another job. And I had a friend who worked at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I had never, ever considered agency work or working for the state, because I thought you really had to sort of have a lot of experience with them. And I didn't have any American conservation experience. So I was like, there's no way I'm ever going to get a state job. But she pointed me to the current position I work in, which is evaluating petitions when people want to list a species under the California Endangered Species Act. And it doesn't involve doing my own research. It involves basically literature synthesis. So going out and reading everybody else's research on Mojave Desert Tortoise or mountain lion, and then sort of synthesizing it all into what the threats are, and how bad the threats are, what the population's doing, and then helping make a recommendation about whether or not to list it. So I am not in a place I ever imagined that I would be, but I'm really happy to have a permanent job. And working for the state has its ups and downs, which we can talk about if you're interested. But yeah, that's my story.
Thank you. And our last panelist today is Sierra Yarns.
Hi, everyone. It looks like, I think there's kind of a line in the middle of my slide, but I like it. It's kind of artsy. So my name is Sierra Yarns. I'm a second-year PhD student in the SM department in Berkeley. My intro might be a little bit shorter considering I've literally only ever been in school. I went pretty much straight out of my undergrad degree to get my PhD. So I actually also got my BS at UC Santa Barbara. I got a double major in ecology and hydrologic sciences, and I worked mainly under 2 different labs. I actually came in initially under pre-med, and I found out that really wasn't for me. I was like, no, like, let's not deal with all these interviews and stuff. I didn't like that. Like, let's go into the ecology side of things. So my first lab was really dealing with like habitat exclusion and like morphometrics of ladybugs, which was a fancy way of saying that me and like a team of some undergraduates were literally dissecting ladybugs to try and figure out like their mandible size. It was super cool. And that was a really interesting kind of lab work, but I realized I really liked the more ecosystem side of ecology. So I started to work in the eco-hydrology lab, where I started to do some work on grassland carbon cycling, like looking at soil respiration, where I was able to work with a lot of the UC NRSs, which are an amazing program, highly recommend. And yeah, so I was able to do a senior thesis under the hydrologic sciences / environmental studies major. And now I'm here where I'm working with Celine Palud in a soil chemistry, kind of doing a little more ecosystem ecology and biogeochemistry. I'm looking at carbon cycling right now, trying to see like what soil organic matter decomposition looks like in drylands under like a lens of like landscape ecology and ecosystems. Yeah, and I'm also involved with a lot of like mentorship and like education, science education things. I've worked a lot at like different science museums and really are trying to incorporate like different forms of like science education and ecology into like K through 12 education and curriculum, and just trying to like kind of reform how the way we look at like science standards and ecology education from the lens of like, you know, academics versus someone in like a K through 12 school or someone who's never actually been exposed to these kinds of things. So I love like actually like trying to mix ecology and education as well. Yeah, thank you. I'm also really happy to be here.
Thank you to all of our panelists for introducing themselves. We're gonna go into some prepared questions.
So we're just gonna go off the questions, and whichever panelist wants to answer can unmute themselves. And so the first one is, did you know you'd be in your current position when you were an undergrad? If not, how did you learn or hear about your current position?
I can answer that since I didn't really go into grad school after my undergrad and kind of joined a job. So I didn't know anything about environmental consulting in undergrad. UC San Diego, you know, was a great school, but it was actually like pretty terrible about like preparing people for like careers outside of undergrad that weren't like research based. But I did find, so I knew that I didn't really want to do research because I was trying it at Scripps and I just wasn't really that into it. And I went to a career fair, like it was like an environmental career fair. And I just like looked, I like gave my information to like every single person that wasn't like a research position. And Dudek was there. And I didn't know what they did. I just knew that they were like an industry job. So I like talked to them and asked for an internship. And it kind of took a little bit because they weren't really looking for interns at the time, but it was like probably like 6 months later, they reached out to me with the opportunity. So then I started doing it, and it was a lot of like on the job learning. Like I didn't really like understand what they did. I still feel like I learn things that they do at my company because we have so many departments and like disciplines. So yeah, I think from that experience, like my recommendation to everyone is just to always like keep a really like open mind with things and like figure out what you like and don't like.
I can jump in here too. As an undergrad, I had no idea that I would be an ecologist for the Forest Service. I don't even think I knew what the Forest Service was at that point in my life. But I will say that it all sort of came together for me in grad school as I was writing up my dissertation. And I remember one day sort of sitting at my desk thinking, is somebody going to use this? I've spent so much of my heart and soul on this research, and I love doing research. But I just had this concern, like, I just don't want this to be just like put away in a journal somewhere. And around that same time, I was also teaching a class here, maybe you took it at UCSB, it is called, it's still being taught, the Ecology and Management of California's Wildlands. And at that point, I realized like, wow, you can do science, like you can do research that informs what we do in our open spaces. And it can actually be picked up, if you do it well, picked up by managers and used. And all of that started coming together at the same time. And so when this job with a federal agency came up, the Forest Service manages, at least in Southern California, a lot of people probably don't even think that there is 4 million acres of open space, but there is, and it's beautiful, and it's, you know, just a really special place that I could be doing science that helps us, you know, conserve these landscapes over the long term. And so I applied and off I went. But as an undergrad, no way, you know, I did not, I had no idea that this would be the direction I would go.
I actually did take that class. It was taught by a grad student. It was a great course. I actually really enjoyed it. It was really amazing. I guess my position on this question might be a little bit redundant. Obviously, people know about grad student positions when you're an undergrad. But I think really what I had trouble with in undergrad was like trying to figure out what exact field for to go into. Like I wasn't really sure like what topics really interested me, and I think like really I knew I wanted to go to grad school, but like trying to figure out like what exactly I wanted to study was really hard. And so in that way, finding that kind of position and like what I wanted to do was really difficult. And like what really helped me was just like actually just exploring it. Like you might think like you'll never find like what exactly interests you specifically, but like if you just keep exploring and taking classes and like reaching out to like professors, postdocs, like grad students, like about work and just involving yourself, like you can find something that will fit with your research desires and like what you actually enjoy doing as well. Like I think there's a lot of different kinds of science out there, especially ecology being as broad as it is. Like, I mean, I do work in soils, and my friends who are also wildlife biologists do work on carnivores or bugs. And it's just, there's so many different ways to look at just science and ecology in particular that, you know, you can just keep exploring and find what you like specifically. And that was kind of what was hard for me being as an undergrad, but it was fun to figure out.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Sam. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think when you're an undergrad and you listen to career panels like this, it's really easy. It's like really easy to get overwhelmed or feel like there's no structure to what you're doing. And it always sounds, talking back about what you did, a lot more organized and strategic than I think it actually feels. And it sounds like, looks like the other panelists probably agree, but when you're doing it, you're kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to do the next thing. Like, what's the next thing? And then you look back and you kind of make sense of how it got you there, and you pull out these like common threads. Like I realized I wanted to do something super applied. Like for me, I'm actually not very interested in research on its own. I'm more interested in applied work. But a lot of the questions I had needed investigating, which is why I ended up here, not somewhere I thought I would end up. Didn't think I would do a PhD. Was pretty done with grad school, both after undergrad and after the first time I went to grad school before I came back and took some time to work. But I guess all of that to say, I think it's okay if like the experiences that you're building in undergrad don't seem to make sense or don't seem to be linear. Like I think Anne mentioned earlier, it's not going to feel that way when you're doing it.
So to add on to what Sam was saying, I feel like a lot of it is just exposure and never, you know, opening up doors. And sometimes you just kind of peek in the door, and other times you walk in all the way. Sometimes you shut that door behind you really quickly. But like through the process of undergrad and you know, jobs right out of school, you start to figure out what you like and what you gravitate towards, and what is an absolute like door shutter, like no thank you, never again. And so I think it's really important to continue to keep putting yourself out there and being exposed, whether it's helping a TA with their own research, or doing a study abroad, or whatever it may be. That those little what feel like random decisions start to, you know, lead you in a direction.
Awesome, thank you. So let's move on to the next question. So what's the favorite part of your job, and what's the least favorite part of your job?
I can start out. My job as a grad student, I feel like it's kind of one and the same, like my favorite and least favorite part. I feel like there's a lot of freedom in what I do. Like I'm able to, I mean, being as early I am in my PhD in the second year, I'm able to kind of develop like my projects and what I want to do. And there's a lot of freedom in like the workflow and like work ethic that you have to provide. And I feel like that's amazing because you're able to kind of balance out like how much laboratory work, like what kind of classes, what kind of like extracurricular like clubs and like activities you want to involve yourself in at the university. But it's also hard to kind of have that kind of like autonomy in a way. You know, it's really amazing, but it's also kind of like a step into, you know, having your own workflow and having to do it yourself. You know, like at least in my position, there isn't necessarily a project that I'm under. So like it's amazing that I'm able to kind of develop these own things, but like it also means that I have to develop it and do these things myself, which is fun, but also not always the easiest thing.
Yeah, to echo that, for me, it's the freedom. I get to do what I want with my day. I get to pursue questions that are interesting to me. And that's probably the only thing that feels like this is worth it right now. I'm like in the throes of my third year post qualifying exams. So like I'm at my most existential right now about my PhD. But I think my least favorite thing is it can feel isolating. Sometimes you have a great lab environment where you're all working on similar things, and I do, but everyone's in the field right now and it's just me working on my stuff. And sometimes you're just sitting there turning it all over your head, like, does this matter? Like, am I just off on some like rabbit hole tangent that's not going to help anyone? So that's the hard part, is to being able to kind of like step back from that and get a little perspective when you're alone all day with your data.
Kind of adding off of that, I definitely understand what that's like. No one, I mean, there's people who do similar things to me at Berkeley, but I'm pretty much the only one who's doing the kind of work that I want to do. So again, it kind of also depends on like what you're looking at, like what exactly you're studying. Sometimes you're going to be the only person with that kind of expertise, even though you still need to do your quals. You still need to do all these things and find professors that are going to like help you out on these things, even though they might not know it exactly. And so you need to do all the literature review yourself. And it is very isolating, but again, there's a lot of freedom in being able to figure all that out yourself. It's really cool, right?
Okay, if none of the other panelists want to add on, we can move on to the next question. So
Well,
what?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead,
No,
Dr.
go.
Are you sure you don't want to add something onto the least favorite part?
Well, I'm realizing it's pretty close to what Sam and Sierra just said, even though I'm not a graduate student. The thing that's very rewarding is I do feel a sense of independence, and I really do appreciate asking applied questions that I know are going to help with decision making. So that's on the positive side, but on the negative side, I really feel like a lone wolf. I walk into the office and there's a recreation specialist, there's a firefighter, in grad school I had a very cohesive unit, and in undergrad too. If I had a challenge, I felt like there was some place I could go. And now that I'm working, at least for the Forest Service, in the kind of structure that I'm in, I'm the only ecologist for 4 million acres. And sometimes it's nice to have someone else to bounce ideas off of and make sure that you're thinking about things properly, because the decisions that I make and the information that I present or the data that I present to the Forest Service makes a difference, and I don't want to get it wrong. And that's can be a little stressful, and that can be isolating.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to the next question. What skills, both research and non-research related, do you recommend students develop as undergrads in order to prepare for their careers? Or what's something you wish you had known or done during your undergrad?
Well, I'll try to be quick here. Sorry. So one of the things that I really wish I would have pursued more of is taking GIS classes. I'm thinking now, I went from undergrad and grad school, I was thinking about small landscapes, little plot level, a couple meters, to now large landscape scale analyses. And so having either some kind of remote sensing or GIS skill set would have been really valuable. The other thing too that I noticed, I hire field crews to do field monitoring from UCSB. And one of the things that I noticed is really lacking is a good, strong natural history skills. I think at least at UCSB, I don't know about the other UCs, that seems to sort of be a dying, taxonomy isn't as popular, field botany isn't as popular. But boy, for people who are studying ecology and want to move forward to studying ecology, I really think it's important. And I have a hard time when I'm hiring field crews finding people with those, taxonomic skills, with those botany skills. And so if you could pick up a class or two, or spend, as you're on a hike, try to identify plants as you go along, I really think that would be valuable.
Yeah, I'll echo that. That's So for consulting biologists, that's like a really important trait, as well as like being able to have good or just some exposure to field identification. So that's if you want a job in biology, then I think taking like field ID classes or any other extracurricular identification coursework goes a long way. I mean, when we're hiring, that's like probably the biggest thing that sticks out on resumes is like, do you have some exposure to identification? Like, could you go out and do a survey and at least know some plants, and then just be interested in learning how to, you know, use dichotomous keys, and or if you're like really into birding, like do you like do it on your own? Just something that shows that you would be able to do some field work and then be interested in learning more. And then for my master's, because I went back a little bit later, what I really wish I had known more of is R, programming. Like I knew like zero coding pretty much going into grad school. So I had to, and like I didn't realize how much it was emphasized in a lot of like ecology. So I had to learn a lot my first year, and like you can learn a lot your first year on your own, but if you have an option to take a course earlier, I'd recommend that.
I think the advice has been given is great, but especially for entry-level jobs, but as I've gotten later in my career, there's definitely gaps I've seen in my own knowledge and sort of biologists in general that I think are becoming, it's less acceptable to have those gaps. And so I would actually encourage you, if you can, to like focus, if you have time, to take humanities classes and learn to write, not just scientific writing, but like learn to write a cogent, logical essay, be able to sort of read broadly and sort of pick out evidence to support your argument and create an argument and then defend it, is a really good skill for no matter where in science you go. Because I realize that many of you are super excited about ecology now, but you may not end up there. And so I think sort of getting broader skills that are useful in a variety of ways that science can take you through life is really helpful. I wish I had taken some sort of ethics class, because there are a lot of really thorny ethical issues around biology, conservation, social justice, environmental justice that you may not think that you'll get involved in, but it's really sort of this idea that science is completely objective and scientists are objective, and there's no need to like get involved in the like really nitty-gritty aspects of how it interacts with human populations is really not true, even though that's sort of what I was taught. And I really wish I had a firmer sort of ethical grounding, because there are definitely times when I have in my career when I've been like, that seems wrong, but I don't know why, and I can't articulate why, and my bosses are telling me to do one thing, but it doesn't feel right. And I just wish that sort of understanding the consequences of sort of management and actions and policy were more sort of laid out for students. I would also say if you can get sort of any experience in like environmental justice, because basically anything you go into now will involve that, will ramify on those issues. And a lot of us who weren't trained for that formally are sort of trying to muddle our way through, and it's not good. Like there should actually be actual training for all of us in how science impacts communities and the opposite way. And I really think that STEM education has sort of moved away from those types of skills to our detriment, honestly. So that would be my pitch, is to sort of broaden out into a lot of the other humanities and sociology and ethics and stuff and get a broader grounding in that.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. I think if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have said R, like do more coding. And now 5 years past that, screw it. Like, I'm so glad I did all the humanities courses, because I was a liberal arts major and I took like random stuff in philosophy as part of my program. And that has like helped me so much, a lot of it with the writing, just like logic, like structuring arguments, like being able to pick through things, being able to read through those things in other articles. I think as a lot of things become automated and there's all these like R packages and different tools and like functionalities in ArcGIS that are going to do things for you, it's really important that you know how to use them and what are important questions. And also, like, does that match how people behave? Like, that's what I'm always asking in my research is like, is what my data is showing, or like what I'm choosing to represent people's behavior accurately reflecting like how people are thinking? And I think in the environmental field in particular, that's going to be just the key going forward.
Okay, well, thank you all for answering our prepared questions. We're going to skip the last one in interest of time and move on to the Q&A portion where the audience can ask you all questions. Feel free to unmute, raise your hand, or use the chat. Or if you want to, you can just DM me or Karen or tweet in any questions.
Okay, I can go ahead and moderate the chat. We got one question about what it entails being a biological consultant, and I think Anna can answer this one.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm happy to, I'll share my email at the end of this if you want to ask me more questions, because it kind of entails a lot. I mean, big picture, we're a for-profit company. So, we are kind of in the like capitalist machine. We're not just like doing research and like yada, yada, yada. Like most of our clients are like private or like public entities that have some sort of project that's going to impact an environmental resource. And we help them navigate the various environmental laws, the most prominent one in California being the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, and the Clean Water Act and Endangered Species Act. And so we do like the necessary field surveys, we do like the data analysis, we do a lot of writing to kind of synthesize the data we collect. And then we sort of do all of the coordination with various agencies to get associated permits and then clearances for the project to be able to go forward. So it's a lot of like inventorying, like I guess like the on the ground work is like you go out to a site and inventory what's there, and then the laws protect certain things. So you look at everything that's on the site and you're like, well, this is protected and this isn't. I'm like oversimplifying it, but that's kind of the gist of it. And then if a project is going to impact something that's sensitive per the law, then you develop mitigation measures or avoidance or minimization measures that the project will implement that will either like avoid the resource or minimize their impact, or if this is kind of like the last tier, or mitigate, meaning that they would potentially purchase land elsewhere to conserve because they're impacting something else. So that's kind of like as concise as I can be about it. But I'll share my email too at the end if you have more questions.
We have a member in the physical room we're in, so he'll ask his question. Yeah.
Hi, hello. So this question was specifically for Ms. Molinari, but I guess it can kind of be expanded to everyone's occupation. And so I was going to ask Ms. Molinari, I'm also kind of interested in career adjacent to yours. I've always wanted to be a park ranger, so I'd be involved with the Park Service. And I just want to ask about kind of the procedures involved with getting a job at the state or federal level. How I know about USA Jobs and like stuff like that to find jobs, but what methods would you kind of recommend to build closer relationships, maybe more, yeah, just like get to know your colleagues better, I guess. So we can find employment in the future. And that goes for kind of all the other speakers. How would you guys recommend we get closer to the kind of people you work with so that we can join your field?
Yeah, I'll say I've heard other people say it feels really hard to break into sort of an agency, and I agree with that. I will say though that there's been a lot of hiring, with recent state initiatives and federal monies coming down. It's the first time that I've been working for the Forest Service where we haven't continued to shrink when people retired. We're actually putting on new positions. So there are some big hiring events, and they're doing things called cluster hires. So they'll take a bunch of ecology positions and they'll put them out all together. Probably, at least for the Forest Service, and National Park Service has something kind of similar. There are programs. One of them for undergrads is called Pathways. And so you would apply for this after you graduate from undergrad, and it's a pathway to start working with a federal agency. And there's a similar thing for PhD students, and they're kind of like a postdoc. It's called the Presidential Management Fellowship. And it's a 2-year postdoc with either USGS or Forest Service or EPA. And so being aware of those stepping stones like pathways or presidential management fellowships is a great way to get your foot in the door. I'll try to look up some information right now and stick it in the chat if I can find anything that's sort of easy for you to grab.
Oh, it's unmuted, so you can.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you panelists find any information that might be helpful, you can send it to the Berkeley or UCR seeds, and then we can relay it on in our weekly newsletters.
Guys, if there are like job ads that come up in our department, do you want us to forward them that are sort of appropriate for people who are still doing their degree or just graduated? Is that something that would be of interest for your weekly newsletter?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, because there are, for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, there's the sort of entry-level positions are SciAids, scientific aides. And they're the ones who do a lot of the field work, and they're not well paid. I think it's about $16.50 an hour. So it's not, and there's a limit of like how many hours you can work per week. So you can't bust your balls and do a lot of field work and get a decent wage. But it's the way that sort of people get in the door of the agencies without getting like a master's degree. And you can advance. There's actually pretty decent advancement without going to grad school in at least in my department. It helps, but a lot of the positions, even the position I'm in, you don't have to have a PhD. You can work your way up. And so the environmentals, like the SciAids, are sort of, if you like field work or you like lab work or you like just messing around and doing stuff, they would be the place to start. And then you can see if you want to work up to other levels that have more sort of reading, writing, synthesis, presentation type stuff. But again, like I said, I think it's a flat rate of $16.50, something like that, all over the state. So depending on where the positions are, it's either an okay wage or like below living pay if you're working somewhere really expensive in California. So it's not great. And it's one of the major barriers in our department to diversifying our workforce is low entry-level pay. I don't know what it's like in the federal agencies, but it's something that they say we're trying to work on, but they're not trying very hard yet, which is really frustrating.
Yeah, I would also recommend like the local wildlife society chapters. That's usually like a lot of like professional biologists attend. I guess I shouldn't say a lot, like attendance is a little bit like hit or miss, but that's been like a really good place to sort of network and like meet other professional biologists. And then at the meetings, and then sometimes they have annual conferences too. There's like always a job board that has like recent listings for like different consulting companies or other like resource agency positions. I know like my work, we just started doing like a annual internship that's like targeted for like students who are just graduating college. I did circulate that around seeds or like this year, I think, and I'll plan to do it again next year when it kind of comes up. But we also like post our positions pretty broadly, I think, like even on like Indeed and stuff like that, and also like just on LinkedIn. I do have a number of, recent graduates who reach out to me on LinkedIn just to like do kind of like the reverse interview thing. And so I think I see them, they'll just like follow a bunch of consulting companies and just sort of like get notified whenever there's job positions and stuff. So that's like another option.
I put a couple links in the chat. The first is for the Forest Service pathways for recent grads. And then there's also a similar program for National Park Service. And then I don't know if any of you have tuned into ESA, the Ecological Society of America. There's an ecolog that has, I mean, a lot of it can be high level careers like faculty positions, but I know that, people post REUs and internships on there as well. So if you have not, put a link in here, but if you have not poked around on Ecolog, that is a place that you should go for sure.
Yeah, and the Texas A&M job board is like the place to go for field jobs, at least in sort of wildlife. And and they have seasonal jobs, they have permanent jobs. My jobs, I mean, like they call everything a job, even if it's unpaid. So pay attention to the actual, like read all the way through and see if they mention a salary or whether it's a weekly stipend or whether it's just sort of housing included. There's a real problem in our field of not paying entry-level positions. And so you got to sort of keep an eye out and make sure that these are actual jobs and sort of balance that with your financial needs. I'll put the link in the chat once I go find it.
I want to say, I know this is true in California, but I don't know about other states, that it's now like illegal to do unpaid internships. So if anyone's offering those, like that's not legal for them to be doing.
Awesome.
State and federal service they tend to still pay their field techs, while if you work like especially NGOs or some academics like don't have that much money to hire field crews, so they sort of pay pretty poorly. But state and federal sort of are bound by labor laws, and so those are probably the better paid positions if you're using that as a filter.
Well, awesome. Thank you for all the job resources and advice. Like I did not think about those things before, like all those red flags, but now I will. Does anyone else have any other questions? We have a couple minutes left. And then we'll compile all these into our weekly email. So don't be afraid if you're missing anything.
Oh, hi, I had a question. Oh, so I heard someone mention that GIS classes would be useful to take for like ecology related things, and I was wondering the big difference between like GIS and data science in the ecology field, like which one would be, I don't know, more useful to minor in like in the long run or take classes in.
Well, there's overlappings, and sorry, do you want to go, Nicole? So like data science and GIS are overlapping Venn diagrams. So the geospatial data is data that's linked to a place on Earth. And so data science principles will apply to GIS. Data science is going to be a little more broad. It's going to probably cover a lot of things that GIS wouldn't cover. However, GIS is going to use those data science principles. So it's more of it's a question of like, how narrow do you want to focus? And are you really interested in spatial data and representing, like, are you interested in remote sensing? Are you interested in mapping? And if you are, then maybe that would point you towards GIS. Otherwise, I would stick to data science.
Okay, thank you.
If no one if no one else has any other questions, we can conclude our session. So thank you all for coming out tonight. We really appreciate all the panelists' time and all the audience's time. I know we're all super busy with midterms. So thank you for the great turnout. And for the panelists, could you, if you haven't, can you put your emails or contact information in the chat?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for the invitation and good luck, everyone. It's exciting. Hopefully it's not scary, and it's exciting thinking about the various paths you have in front of you as you move forward.
Yeah, I hope everyone got something out of this. And to conclude, these are our respective links that we'd like to share for Berkeley and UCR seeds. So please join Highlander link if you haven't. That's how you'll get our weekly emails. This is the UC Berkeley's link tree, and here are our Instagrams.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you everyone for coming, and thank you again to all of our panelists. You offered like some really good advice, and we're glad that you were able to make the time to talk with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.